You're here because you want an answer to the question, how do we lose fat? But I'm going to challenge you and say that that is not the question that you should be asking first. The question that we need to be asking ourselves before we ask, how do we lose fat? It's how do we gain fat? And the reason why I think that we need to ask this question first is because when we understand how we gain fat, well, guess what? We can prevent it from happening in the first place. And even more importantly, when we understand how we gain fat, when we do eventually lose it, we know how to keep it off. But in order to truly understand how to stop gaining fat and ultimately reverse the process, we have to get to the root cause. And more often than not, what we tend to do is not get to the root of the problem, but we treat the symptoms or the effect, but we're not getting to the cause. So the first place that we're going to look is energy balance. And when we're talking about energy balance, we're talking about energy in and energy out. You've heard it said before as calories in and calories out, right? And it's been said a million times that we as a people, we're continuing to get fatter decade after decade because we eat too much, we don't exercise enough, we're not active enough, and we live more sedentary lives. And there's some truth to that, but it's not the whole story. And it's true that we do consume more calories than we did, say, 30 to 40 years ago, but not by a whole lot. What we should be looking at is not, are we consuming more, but where are we consuming the calories we consume from? And we're going to return to that in just a little while. First, I want to talk a little bit about your experience. Now, the question I have for you is, how many of you have tried in an attempt to get fit at some point? You tried lowering your calories and increasing your exercise. Now, let me ask you another question. Did you struggle to lose weight? Hands up. Did you struggle to keep it off? Hands up. Or are you one of these people who maybe you never really had a weight problem and maybe you always did things kind of right? You exercised, you ate pretty well, and you never really had to worry about any of this stuff. And by all accounts, I mean, you were pretty fit at one point. But gradually, over the last 5, maybe 10 years, you started to notice your weight creeping up just a little bit each year. So maybe it was 2 pounds, but then all of a sudden we multiply that by 5 years and you're 10 pounds heavier and you haven't changed anything. So let's be honest. We as a generation, we take a more conscious effort towards fat loss than our grandparents and great-grandparents ever did. And their generation had a very low prevalence of obesity. Would you agree? I mean, you look at pictures of people back in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, like there weren't many obese people. It was a rarity. And there's a lesson to be learned there, which we are definitely going to touch on. But let's forget about our grandparents, our great-grandparents for a minute. And in that time, in the last few decades, like just over the last few decades, the average amount of calories consumed by men and women has largely been unchanged. So we have more fitness programs now than we've ever had access to. You can get a ton of stuff for free. And yet obesity continues to rise each and every year. So no matter where you are along the fat loss spectrum, it doesn't matter if you have 4 to 10 pounds to lose or 40 plus. I'm going to tell you right now, the struggle is pretty much the same. And to understand why the commonly prescribed formula of exercise more and just eat less for fat loss is unsustainable over time, let's take a look at what I like to call the biggest loser syndrome. And we call this the biggest loser syndrome simply because, well, you've probably seen the show before. And on The Biggest Loser, what happens? They dramatically reduce their caloric intake, right? They just eat less food. They almost starve them. They dramatically increase their exercise. These people, they dramatically lose weight from one week to the next, and then they tragically gain it all back. In fact, there was one contestant who was once quoted as saying, there's a reason why they don't have a reunion show. We all wind up fat again. And the question is, why? Why does this happen? Well, it happens for them for the same exact reason why you struggle, and that is, we have royally screwed up the energy out part of this equation. So think about it for a moment. If you've increased your exercise and activity and you still can't lose the last few pounds or keep them off, then maybe the problem goes well beyond having to burn a few hundred extra calories. If your eating patterns have remained relatively the same over your adult life and you're steadily gaining weight year after year, maybe it's not an issue of what's coming in, but rather what's not coming out. So you're using up what's going in like you did when you were a teen. I mean, you're not, is what I should say. You're not using it up like you did as a teen, right? And that much is pretty obvious. So let's ask the question, what is the reason why? Why are you not using it up the way that you once did as a teen? And the short answer is hormones. And our hormones regulate every function in our body. They act like a little thermostat that helps us to survive and maintain homeostasis, which is balance. And what happens is, like a thermostat, when your body senses it's going in a certain direction, it triggers or secretes hormones that help to pull us back to center. If things start to swing too much in the other direction, it changes the temperature on the thermostat and it brings things back to normal. That's how our body works. Yet when we approach fat loss, we tend to think of it like a scale, like just eat less and exercise more. But the thing is that you're working both with and against your hormones in this situation. And so if we don't give enough consideration to our hormonal health, it's going to make it really challenging to ever figure out how to lose the fat and keep it off. But like I said, we just keep treating the energy balance equation. Now, what if this energy balance equation was flawed? I'm not saying it's wrong, because the laws of thermodynamics say that if you eat less, you should lose fat. And it's true. It happens. But I'm just saying that there's some flaws to this thing. And that's what we're here to dive into. So the question is, what if gaining and losing fat or fat loss wasn't regulated like a scale, but more like a thermostat? If every other function in our body is, like, why should fat loss be any different? It's the dysfunction of our hormones that causes us to store more fat and use less energy. That's how you can eat so little on a diet or on a daily basis and then still seem to gain fat or just have a ton of trouble losing it. So we're going to take a quick look right now at some of the hormones that are responsible or play a role in this. First of which is insulin. And insulin is considered the fat storage hormone. And though its main function is to transport and store glucose and amino acids in the body, it's the hormone that's most responsible for us storing fat. The next hormone that we're going to look at is glucagon. And glucagon works in opposition to insulin, and it's largely responsible for helping us to burn fat. Then we have our thyroid. And our thyroid hormones are what manage our metabolism, our energy expenditure. Next is norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is a hormone that plays a role in increasing our metabolic rate. Next is leptin. And leptin is called the starvation hormone. And it's one of the main regulators in signaling the body to access stored fat for energy. It also is one of the ones that helps to regulate our hunger. Along those same lines is ghrelin. Ghrelin is known as the hunger hormone. And it's the hormone that signals the body when it's time to eat. Cortisol. So cortisol is known as the stress hormone. You've probably heard of this one before. And it's the one that's responsible for storing belly fat. Now, as horrific as cortisol seems, it actually plays a very important role in our survival. But for someone with chronically elevated cortisol levels, it absolutely spells disaster. And that's where a lot of the negative headlines come from. Next up is HGH, human growth hormone. And this is an anabolic hormone. This is what helped us to develop from being a child into an adult. And this is the one that helps us to build muscle, build strength, lose body fat. But between the years of 20 and 30, HGH starts to decline, which is one of the reasons it's more difficult for us to build muscle as we reach the middle age years, and why it becomes easier to store body fat. So the question is, what throws our hormones so out of whack that we are unable to burn fat more easily or keep it off? Well, we're going to start getting into that question in the next video.